Here we go. I'm going to show video first. It's the one I couldn't find last week. Um, it's older, a little bit older, but it's really good. The information is really good. So I am going to attempt to show it. Let me share my screen first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start it and then I'm going to make it big. But if something happens and then you don't see it, just yell at me or something. Let me know. Of course, we got to have an ad.
We're not hearing sound, or at least I'm not hearing sound on my end. Do you hear sound, Dr. Bedard?
I don't hear sound either.
So you can
Neither
see
do
it, but
I.
you can't hear it.
Uh-huh.
Okay, hang on a second. Hang on a second. Let me do this again. Advanced. Where is? Bear with me just 1 second, guys. That's really it. Frustrating. Hang on a second. Well, all right, I'll figure it out in a second. We'll skip it for now. I'm gonna show it. I'm gonna show it. I put it on Moodle too, but I was gonna show everybody. I will figure that out and come back to it. That's not gonna stop anything we're gonna do. Do anybody have any questions about anything before I jump headfirst into talking? Okay. All right. Today we're going to talk about young adulthood. Some people call it emerging adulthood, young adulthood. I kind of look at it as um, I actually look at it as an extension of adolescence in a lot of ways. And the main reason is because of a lot of the brain formation that happens. And what we're talking about today is we get past high school and we start getting into college and then even into the later 20s. So it's kind of like a decade we're going to look at. And then our last class, we're going to look at adulthood as a whole, like in the 30s on, from the 30s on. And so this, I've not always talked about this age group a lot, but recently I've had more clients in this age group. And I'll say actually probably middle to late 20s into like middle 30s. I've had tons of clients in that age frame, and just some things I've noticed clinically over the past 5 or 6 years. Um, like right now, I've got probably 10 clients that are in that I'm seeing individually that have various kinds of things they're working on. But one of the things that I hear a lot, and it might be the industries I work in, but what I hear a lot is things that pertain to imposter syndrome type stuff. Like, I don't know if I deserve to be where I'm at, or, I think people are basically, I think someday someone's going to wake up and realize I'm a fraud and I shouldn't be here, kind of thing. And that is ironically, that happens to a lot of therapists when you first start out too. It's kind of even doesn't matter your age, that happens to a lot of us, because we feel like we are not ready to see clients and like we should be helping people, but we don't know enough yet, or like don't know enough or have enough experience. But I'm hearing this, and that phrase has not been around that long, really. It's a pretty new phrase. And so I want to start with kind of we'll look at some physical things, but mainly cognitive development and early adulthood. And again, we're talking about 18 to 25, 26. We'll look at that kind of age range. I've put these PowerPoints on Moodle if you guys want them. It's chapters 13 and 14. Y'all can load those up if you'd like. And so this transition from, adolescence to adulthood is kind of what we're starting to talk about. And the transition 100 years ago looked one way, and now looks different. And in the grand scheme of things, 100 years is not that long. And so one thing that I'm kind of curious about, and I'll just kind of throw this out since we have a smaller group. What would you guys say would signify an actual transition from adolescence to adulthood? Like, what is that? How would you know if someone was an adult?
I was thinking about that today because I was looking at like the discussion board for the next one. And I got to kind of thinking about that. And for me, it was when I had to like pay for everything on my own. Like when I was like financially responsible for everything. But I mean, I know that's not the case for everyone.
But a heavy emphasis on the financial part, like when you were financially responsible and no one else.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. What else?
Yeah, I agree with that. It's like a lot of times the almost empty threat is that, well, if you want to do it your way, you got to pay for it. So it's like there's a monetary kind of signifier on, you going from being a child and being a dependent versus, being able to do whatever you quote unquote want to do, or be able to make decisions that maybe you don't get questioned on as much. So that's like that transition. I remember before I left for college, I remember always asking my parents, hey, can I go here? Can I do this? Can I do that? Right. And so after my first semester of college, I came back for Christmas. And I remember telling my dad, hey, I'm going so-and-so. And he just looked at me and said, all right. And it was like in that moment, I realized that there had been a change,
Yeah. In your relationship.
Right. In a relationship, but then also in them looking at me and not feeling like they had to give me permission to do whatever. And maybe it was just me feeling that way, actually,
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. Yeah. What else? That's good. Very good.
I say for me, it was just the college experience or going off to college and getting ready for college, because no one in my family had gone to college. So they didn't know that experience, taking, certain tests and applying for FAFSA and the whole scholarship process. So I was pretty much doing that on my own. So in my experience, that was, the adulthood for me, because nobody knew how to do that. So I was doing that all on my own. So that was them pushing me out the door, because they didn't know how to do any of that. So to me, that was my adulthood experience, going into
So,
adulthood.
yeah. So if they didn't do it, or if you didn't do it, no one's going to do it.
No, exactly. So I
Yeah.
had to do that part on my own. So
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Anybody else?
And
For
I was just
me,
gonna say,
sorry,
go ahead.
you go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, yes, I saw some of that independence starting in college. However, I think the real cutoff was in the middle of my college experience. I chose to get married. And so that was like the defining moment. Like that was, okay, it's all you now, and you're responsible for everything else. So I feel like that was the piece right there. But that was very unique situation on my part.
Good. Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's
Yeah, I
a
was going to say the same
large
thing.
decision. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Marriage was the big one. So I came to the US for college. At that time, I was on my own, doing a lot of adult things, but my parents were still financially support me. So I feel like financial is a big part. Once I start working, I got married right before my first job. I think that's a big transition to the real adulthood.
Yeah.
However, I still feel somewhat immature. I think having children was a drastic change. Like you're responsible for another life. That will make you a real adult.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like being a mom, the effect of being a mom is more than, financial independence and have a family. Just got married.
For
Yeah.
sure. Yeah. Well, I talk to people a lot. I do a lot of premarital counseling. One of the things I talk about with people is when we meet someone that and we fall in love, we're gonna get married or we're gonna live together or whatever we're gonna do, we find out how selfish we are because we go from me to we. And then when you have children, if you decide to have children and you can have children and you go me and we to 3 or 4, maybe you find out how really selfish you are. Because kids have a tendency to bring up a lot of things or bring out a lot of things. They don't. Them coming into the family has a tendency to do that. So that totally makes sense that you would feel an extra level of adulthood, for sure. And one of the things that I notice when we talk about adulthood, just in general, is the financial part typically is the first thing that almost everyone points out, which makes a ton of sense. I mean, we as kids, we're relying upon our families, and even into and out of college, we could rely on our families financially. That's not, and there's nothing wrong with that. That happens, but there seems to be this financial part of becoming an adult that's really important. And so let's talk about that kind of transition. And so again, we're going to focus really not just 25, but we're going to kind of push that a little bit. We're going to go into the late 20s. There's a lot of experimentation and exploration that happens during this time frame, even more than in high school, like a lot more most of the time. And that doesn't mean sometimes you read that and you think that means like drugs and alcohol. It means anything like career, like I don't know if I want to do this or that, or sometimes some people might date or not date. I mean, there's a lot of things that people start experimenting and exploring to discover about themselves. And it's not necessarily bad, actually. It's actually a part of the developmental process, which is kind of important for us to think about because if we don't do certain parts of that developmental process before we move on, we sometimes get stuck. And we need to accomplish the things that we need to accomplish. So some of the key features, just that, and we've talked about identity, the exploration of that, especially in love and work, like relationships and work, because career starts to become a thing from around 18, 19, 20 on. A lot of self-focus, and this feeling of in between. We'll talk about that here in a second, because that actually, to me, comes back into our 40s and 50s, which we'll talk about next time. But this kind of idealistic age of possibility is a thing as well, which is good. And we can basically kind of create or recreate whoever we want to be. There's a lot of change that's happening in this in this time frame as well. I think that one of the biggest changes, and a lot of the research is talking about this. One of the biggest changes is the amount of parental involvement farther into this stage. Whereas maybe some of us potentially maybe had less and less parental involvement as we moved into our 20s. That might not necessarily always be the case now. And I'm not bringing this up because it's good or bad. This is what's happening. So it's just a part of this process now. And that's not necessarily always bad. One of a friend of mine in my neighborhood, we talk a lot about, our kids are about the same age, and they've got one that's about to graduate, and then one that's my son's age. And so we talk a lot about like empty nest and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And he was bringing it up. He was talking to me the other day. Is like, let's say buying a house. The odds of buying a house now when you're 25 is pretty slim, unless you live in certain places. I don't live in a very expensive town. My town's very small. The cost of living here is not very much, but houses are pretty expensive. And unless you have a really good job, it's going to be hard to buy a house. So that's like one indicator of financial freedom is a house. Now you can rent, but buying a house is going to be something that's going to be difficult. Just like sometimes people have student loans, maybe, let's say, or there's other financial burdens that some people might have, and that's one of the reasons why parents kind of stick with them for a little while. Some of that's cultural too. Some of those things in collective societies and collective cultures, it's more common for families to be more involved with them even as they get older. And so some of it is there's a cultural component to it. But there's this competency, this kind of challenge to competency that's kind of interesting. And when we talk about competency, we're not talking about like not being able to make decisions or figure things out. Sometimes it's not being able to realize that they can do it, not being able to realize that they have choices and they can make choices and they can do things. But there's this kind of change that's been happening over the past decade or so of competency. We're going to talk more about that as we go. We kind of y'all brought these up: having a job, economic independence, taking responsibility for yourself. Those are markers of adulthood. Those have been markers for forever. Those aren't new. Those markers have been around for a long time. I want to get around some of this stuff. Peak physical performance typically occurs around the age of 30. Okay. I also can argue that mitochondrial enzymes are still active into your 70s. So your peak performance might physically happen in your 30s. But what we also know about muscle and brain activity is that if you use it, you keep it. If you don't use it, you lose it. That's just how it works. But having said that, there is a lot of decline that does happen as you get into your 30s and 40s and 50s, for sure. Physically, that's for sure. That actually absolutely happens. So this is kind of a new trend, a new research statistic. Emerging adults have twice the mortality rate of adolescents. They're having more chronic health problems now, more engagement in health compromising behaviors, more likely to be obese, and they're more likely to have mental disorders than adolescents. And what we're talking about is, especially the mental health part, the rise in depression and anxiety in teenagers is for sure happening, but it's also happening in all the other age groups. It just so happens in this particular emerging adult group, it's happening a little bit quicker, which is kind of interesting. There's probably multiple reasons why. There's not one reason. So anytime we read things like this, we need to think in terms of like multiple variables responsible, not like one thing. Because a lot of times we want to reduce it down to like, I wonder why that's happening. Well, it's probably this. Well, it's probably this and 5 or 6 or 10 other things. There's multiple things happening. I think I said this last time. Developmentally, there hasn't been a ton of change in our development as human beings over time, but our surroundings have changed drastically. So there's a lot of environmental factors at play. So this is just kind of looking at mortality rates in terms of adolescents, emerging adults. This is just in the US. So you can see the difference between ages 12 and 17 and 18 to 24, especially with males. That's a massive, massive increase. 137 deaths per 100,000. That's massive. That's a massive increase from 47. It's a lot. It's a lot. That's a big increase. And again, I am actually seeing a lot more folks in this age group, mainly in the mid 20s. Some of the stuff I'm gonna kind of skip over a couple of things. Last time when we met, I don't remember how much we did or did not talk about substance abuse. Can someone, if anybody was here last time, I just can't remember how much we talked about it. Does anybody remember if we did it all? Because I don't remember. Or I can just talk about it again. That's fine too. I do want to talk about binge drinking. When I worked at Texas Tech, when I taught there in the undergraduate program, I used to give a binge drinking assessment to people and have them, I didn't pick it up. I just had them take it and kind of score it themselves and look at it. And we talked about binge drinking. Binge drinking is having 5 or more drinks in a row at least once in the last 2 weeks. And so, and then you have like, extreme binge drinking, which is 10 to 15 drinks in a row in at least 2 weeks. And now we have pre-gaming, which is basically getting drunk before you go out and socialize. And then alcoholism itself, or abuse, is long-term, repeated, uncontrolled, compulsive, excessive, but it also impairs someone's health, their relationship, and it occurs in multiple areas of their life. And so when we think about when experimentation in terms of drinking does happen in this age group, for sure. The majority of people will come out of this time and not be binge drinkers or alcoholics, the majority of them, but a certain percentage will have some type of abuse or addiction. It's interesting because there seems to be there's probably a lot. I have actually seen more adults that I would say are binge drinking. Like when I say adults, I mean 30, 40, 50-year-olds binge drinking during the week than I have seen in adolescents over the past 5 years, I would say. I worked at a practice before COVID. I was there for about 5 years before COVID. And in this particular area, I happened to stumble upon a mom's drinking group from a client I was working with. It was basically, in this particular group, was all stay-at-home moms that would, during the week, multiple times a week, they drop their kids off, do whatever, and then they would all meet somewhere and drink, cocktails or wine or whatever. And a couple of them, well, not a couple, multiple of them got DUIs from this. And these are just like moms in a neighborhood that you would never know. And the reason I found out about it is because I had a couple of clients that were a part of two separate groups. And I just got really curious about it because I thought it was really interesting. And at first I was like, this is not a coincidence, because I had two moms, same age, you know, that had the same issue, and kind of asked them about it. And I kind of learned that this was one of the things that was happening, which I think is kind of interesting, because you would expect some of these things maybe on the weekend, but not during the week. And then and there's the anxious part of me that's like, oh crap, I'm driving around with my kids, and there's people that could be drunk driving and picking up kids from school. I mean, it's kind of interesting when you think about it. So this idea of binge drinking is an interesting one, because we typically think of it in this age group, but it can happen in any age group. It can happen at any time. And the reason why binge drinking itself is so dangerous is because it takes 6 to 8 hours for your liver to process like 8 to 10 ounces of alcohol. So if you dump, several ounces in there in your stomach, it's going to take you a number of hours for that to actually process, so that you're actually sober again. So anyway, that's one of the reasons why it's so detrimental. This is just a look at the binge drinking in terms of like ages. And if you'll look, there's like a little drop off here from 21, 22 to 23, but then that's pretty equal there until 35. And that's still not very low. Over 20%. That's a lot. And I think these numbers correlate with what my experience has been clinically. And as a rule of thumb, clinically speaking, most people underreport their drinking or drug use most of the time. I think we talked about some of this. I'm gonna look. There's a couple things I want to talk about for sure. Marijuana use, excuse me, is on the increase for sure, in colleges and with adults, and some of that state driven. Like some states are legalizing marijuana now, and some states have you can get medical prescriptions for marijuana or different forms of THC, and so those are also on the rise. There's some interesting studies that are coming out now about marijuana that a lot of marijuana advocates do not like, and that is there's some pretty negative long-term effects that they're finding out about people that have smoked marijuana for years, like effects on your central nervous system, and actually also on your digestive system. There's some new studies that have come out in the past, I would say, year or two, about this that are very fascinating. And then there's also the viewpoint that people have about marijuana, that like I've worked with clients that think, well, it's just like alcohol, it's no big deal. And then I've got clients that are like you got every kind of view of it that you can think of. The long and short of it is marijuana and alcohol are both depressants. So they act as depressants to your central nervous system. Same thing with opioids. It's in heroin. It's different with methamphetamines or any kind of amphetamine. Those are stimulants, so those are going to stimulate. Nicotine's another one, stimulate your central nervous system. Those are things you can think about. I've had multiple clients that would have sleep problems, and one of the first things I ask them is, how much caffeine do you drink, and when's the last time of the day that you drink caffeine? Because that has a huge effect on your sleep patterns for sure. And so those are just things that are all of these are going to come up. You're going to work with these, and then that's why we have specific classes that deal with addiction, that you'll look at. There was something here I wanted to talk about. Sexual orientation. There's something here I was going to talk about. just a couple of things here. When we look at sexual orientation in terms of like surveys that have been done recently, and this one, I think this is from 2019. This is either 2019 or 20, I can't remember, but or it might be 2021 actually. Around 3.8% of U.S. adults report being gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transsexual. So that a lot of these surveys are done, and they kind of the surveys used to be really narrow and focused. Now they're getting more broad. So this survey is one that's done. It's a little broader, and then there's also like a growing research body into transgender folks as well, and so that's not necessarily different in some of these surveys, but even some of our textbooks aren't including some of that yet, because that's still, in terms of like study, is still new in terms of study. And so the book, this particular edition, does a good job. The next edition that's coming out is going to have a little bit more when it comes to sexual orientation. One of the things that that I will say, in terms of, if we think about sexual orientation, that's kind of misleading a little bit, in that when we talk about someone's sex, we're talking about their reproductive system mainly, versus gender, which is more on the cultural, social, emotion, socially is not necessarily talking about reproduction. And so that's a little bit misleading, but for terms of our discussion, talking about it in terms of sexual orientation. And there's lots of different ways to look at some of these things. I don't have a need or desire to get into debates about these things in our classes. What we need to be aware of is that you're going to have clients that are going through various stages, maybe even of coming out. I've had multiple clients at various stages of coming out, either gay or lesbian or bisexual or transsexual or transgender. That's going to happen. That's going to happen more and more. And that's something that I know for a fact, like in our, what class is it? I think it's in the cultural competence class. You'll talk about this a lot more as well. I kind of want to skip through a couple of things here. Let's look at, I want to talk about, I'm going to jump over here to some neuro stuff. So when we get into this stage, we start to get specializing. We start to specialize more. And so we start to kind of narrow our knowledge base. And we go from having a wide range knowledge base to getting really specific. And a lot of that's career driven, where you become kind of really knowledgeable in a specific area. It doesn't mean that you don't have knowledge in other areas. It just means that you start to increase your knowledge in a specific area. You become a little more sophisticated, which is kind of a nice way to say mature. You start to mature, not just cognitively, but socio-emotionally as well. You don't think necessarily as you can think more abstractly, or you should be able to think more abstractly in this stage. It doesn't mean that you always do, that you just have more of a ability to do that. And there's this idea of like this post-formal or fifth stage, which is kind of a new area that's been being explored in the research. And new, I mean the last 40 years. So it's not like super new, but pretty new. This idea of being reflective, textual, provisional, realistic, recognized as being influenced by emotion, which is a new thing, really. And wisdom and meaning are becoming important developments, which I think is super fascinating, because probably, like, if you let me put my anthropological hat on for a second, if we look back in history, like some certain civilizations, wisdom was like it. Gaining wisdom was the thing that you did, and wisdom incorporated lots of things, and that was a central part of education for a long time. Wisdom, which wisdom is not just knowledge but experience that comes with knowledge. So wisdom is also the piece of like, hey, I make mistakes and I learn from them, kind of thing. Like that's been around, for that thought and that idea has been around a long time. If we were to even speak about this from a religious Christian religion or spiritual biblical standpoint, one of the things that Solomon talked about was his father David telling him to gain wisdom. He said, my father, when I was at his knee and when I was on my mother's lap, they said, gain wisdom. That was something that they were trying to get him to do. And when God asked him what he wanted, he could ask anything. He said, I want wisdom. He could have anything he wanted. He said, I want wisdom. That idea of gaining wisdom is not a new one necessarily, but we're starting to look at it a little bit differently, which I personally think is smart. Here's why. If you think about wisdom, you don't gain wisdom just through knowledge, and wisdom comes over time, not all at once. And the number one way that we can gain wisdom is what? Making mistakes and then learning from them. And what's the one thing that is really hard to do in our world right now? And that's make mistakes. Because there's this push for perfectionism in lots of areas, and perfectionism is a myth. It's not possible. And so when you make mistakes, now you shouldn't make mistakes on purpose. That's not what we're talking about. But when you make mistakes or something doesn't go right or something bad happens, being able to look at it, find meaning in it, and then find a way, like learn from it, that's where wisdom comes in. That is what we're kind of talking about with this kind of like post-formal stage. This idea of having wisdom, I think, is a really smart one. I kind of hinted at this last week when I talked about social media and screen time and finding balance. To me, balance is, there's some wisdom in helping kids find balance and helping them realize that there can be balance there. But it also means that we're going to make mistakes and we're going to mess up and things aren't always going to go right. And so I think it's an interesting kind of thought. The book does a pretty good job of kind of talking through this and going through it. Let's talk in terms of like career. Obviously, achievement, developmental changes in career, finding your path and your purpose. These are all things that happen in this stage where you start to figure out what you want to do, who you want to be, where you want to work. It doesn't mean that that's all you're going to do. I'm assuming some of you in this class right now started in one career and now are going to a different career or something. We've all, it's not uncommon to switch careers, even switch paths in the same general career. But work becomes a little more important in people's lives. I want to talk. Yeah, let's talk about this, because this growth mindset, fixed mindset, kind of bounces off what I was talking about when it comes to wisdom too. We talk about growth. If we think that we are who we are and this is it and that's all there's going to be, then that's all there will be. If we think this is who we are, but this is not who we're going to be, this is who this is who we are right now, but we're going to be something later, that's more growth. So for example, and this is happening in my family right now, where my daughter is, first crush, first boyfriend, first everything, and the relationship is cracking and we're kind of preparing for the, you know, the inevitable breakup and into the world. And we have to remind ourselves that she's, you know, 15 and this is not who she is, right? You know, a year from now, 2 years from now, 10 years from now, this isn't going to matter as much. It matters right now. We're going to be there for her. At the same time, when our kids do things, say things, make mistakes, we have to remember that this is not who they are. This is who they are right now, right? Same thing with your clients. When you're working with someone, this is not who your client is forever. This is who they are right now. They're going to be something, you know, they're going to grow. I personally think having a growth mindset can be something you can incorporate as a clinician. If not, then why would we work with people? In other words, why would we think anybody can change? Anyone can change at any time. Anytime they want, you can change. I'm not saying it's easy, but you can do it. The other piece of this time frame is this ability to delay gratification, which really does come on as your brain fully forms and that prefrontal cortex really comes online. That really helps a lot in terms of self-control, impulse control, even decision making, things like that. It just happens so late. That's why a lot of times parents have to be that delayed gratification for their kids in a lot of ways. And so that all of these kind of areas are important things that happen, and that's a lot of stuff that happens. And so if people can grab that kind of growth mindset early in their life and keep it and make it a part of their life, it really has tremendous benefits for them. It doesn't mean that their life will be easy. It just means that things that they go through, they'll be able to work through.
Okay, I was making notes.
Yeah.
Did I write this correct? You said this is not who you are, it's just where you are now. Is that
It's who you are right now? Mm-hmm. It's who you are right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Does that make sense when I say that?
Yeah, it does.
What y'all think about that? I trademarked that. That's mine. I made it up.
I think it makes sense. It's kind of like our personal evolution. When I look at like me personally, I got married at 23 years old. And, you know, people always ask, well, you know, why did you get married so early? And that's one reason. And then I ended up getting divorced. And they're like, well, and I was like, well, at 23, I didn't really know anything. Like what I thought I needed to know, or the standards I needed to go by for deciding on a wife or a mate or whatever, it was so minimal as opposed to what just a few years later I would learn that I needed in a relationship, or didn't need, or didn't want, or whatever, you know?
Or you knew everything.
Well, I think that's why my family didn't really stop me, because they're like, well, you know, he probably knows it already. Or
how can you stop someone though, right? How do you?
I probably would have pushed them away.
Yeah, how do you stop? How do you stop? You know, we were talking about that with my 15-year-old daughter. We're like, two choices. We could say you cannot date this person anymore. Like we could just say you can't do it. That's it. That is a strategy.
Yeah.
It's not a good strategy, but it's a strategy, right? Versus, well, this ain't gonna end well, and we're gonna be up late. Some late nights this summer is gonna be tough, and we're gonna have a lot of trips to Dairy Queen, and you know, but that's what parents do, right? That's what we do. But that's not who we are. That's who we are right now. In, you know, 6 months we're gonna be different. A year we're gonna be different. 5 years we're gonna be different.
So do you give her like those little nuggets of information, like it's not going to end well? You just let it out.
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
No. I don't tell my kids anything unless they ask me.
Okay.
I don't tell anybody anything unless they ask me. Not that you're not trying to help people, but this is not about what's good for me. It's what's good for them. Now, obviously, if someone's going into something harmful, that's different.
Right.
You know, that's different. If something's abusive, that's different. If something's, you know, that obviously there's times you're gonna step in, but and that's true for as a clinician, right? As a clinician, I've worked with couples for a long time. I've told a handful of couples they shouldn't be together. A handful, and I'm talking about I can count them on one hand.
Right.
And that was because of they were in an abusive cycle. Other than that, I've tried to help people. It doesn't mean that they don't come to that realization themselves, because they do. This idea of motivation that's up here now, like extrinsic and intrinsic, is legit. This is true. This is for real. We do things because of something we can get that's outside ourselves, like work. We get money, and we do some things, or we're motivated intrinsically because we're determined, or there's an opportunity or a choice we want to make. Right? We can be motivated in either way. The interesting thing about motivation in general, if we think about motivation and then like habit formation, let's say, motivation is all emotionally driven for the most part, right? When we feel motivated, like you can talk to someone about like working out, for example. I'll just use that. That's one that came to mind. I don't feel like it. What you're really saying is I don't feel motivated, right? A habit exists regardless of emotion. You could feel like it or not, but you still do it because it's a habit. And it takes longer to form habits, good and bad, right? So if we want to break a bad habit and start a good one, it's going to take longer, 90 days roughly, something like that, right? Goal setting and planning, that's something that can start really happening in this age. Doesn't mean you can't do it before, because you can, but that's something that someone will start doing for themselves and actually start following through with it. I think it's good to start doing this early with kids too, in a kind of a controlled way, like certain goals. Like my son and we're going to do, I don't even know why I'm doing this other than I just want to hang out with him. We're going to do 3 triathlons this summer in back-to-back months, and so we're kind of training for it. And he's the one that kind of went out and researched the nutrition. We kind of talked about it, and I found a training plan that we're about to start in a couple weeks, and that's a goal. And my son for one is very extrinsically motivated. Like he finds goals outside himself to do right now. And so one of the things is like, hey, you know, he wants to get in shape. And I was like, hey, let's get in shape. But he also likes to have something to do, not just like get in shape for getting shapes. You know, he wants to do something. So I was like, well, let's do this. So that's what we're going to do. Well, that's a long-term view. This is the last one we're going to do is in September, but short term, you got to do certain things along the way. And so I think that what's interesting about motivation is that there are definitely days already that I'm like, oh my gosh, like this morning I got up and worked out. I did not want to. I was very tired. I didn't want to do anything, but I did it because my alarm went off, and it's a habit. I've been doing it I've been working out for a couple of years. But now I have a habit. So you just do it, right? You can think about any habit that you have. Think about how long it took you to get that habit, good or bad. Think about it, right? We all have habits. And anytime we want to change a habit, we have to think really specifically about how we want to change it and then go about doing it. And that takes that planning, kind of long-term, short-term, kind of looking at things. And that's definitely something that is on board by the time folks get to 18 to 25 into the 30s, for sure. You can totally do it. Hang on a second. Grit is a new concept also, that's been around now for about 10 years or so. The concept of grit's been around for centuries. It's just been kind of researched and kind of put into words recently. But basically it's kind of like I can have something that I'm good at and I put some effort into it. And then I'll get better at it and I'll get more skilled. And I'll take that skill and put more effort into it and become an expert. So in that way, the effort counts twice, right? You have an initial thing you're good at, and you got to put effort into it to get a skill. Once you have a skill, you put more effort into it, and that's when you become more of an expert. So the effort part counts twice, right? If you don't have the effort part in there, you don't get to be the expert. I talk about this with kids with video games all the time. There are kids that are good at certain video games, and what do? They put a ton of effort into it, tons, and they get good at it, and they get more skilled, and they take that skill that they've got, they put more effort in it, and they can become, really kind of an expert in that game. Now, is that a great use of their time? Maybe not, but that's what they've done, right? That's kind of what they've done, and you can say that about just about anything. It's that passion and persistence to achieve something that drives you, even when something doesn't go well. Jenny just put something in the chat about SpaceX, that the rocket blew up today, and that's something that's not going to stop them. They're just going to figure out what happened and do it again. That's grit. That's what that is. Because the long-term goal outweighs any of the things you have to go through to get there. That whatever is out there outweighs it. And so sometimes people have no problem with the persistent grit part. Sometimes they don't have the right goals, or maybe the goals aren't big enough, or maybe they don't think that way. So there's things as clinicians that we can kind of think about when it comes to this. This is especially true if you end up working in like the career counseling fields. These are areas that you would definitely help folks in for sure. 20% of young people have a clear vision of what they want to do in life. That's not very much, 20%. These are just some questions that you can ask. Notice that all of these questions are or most of them are like what and how. And when you say why, it's okay, but why is not as good as what or how. What, and I would even change this one. Why are these goals important? I would say, what makes these goals important? Like anytime someone's talking to you about almost anything, like I had a client this week talk about not wanting to party as much, and had set a goal at the beginning of the year. He wanted to party a little bit less and do other things, blah, 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 blah. And I just said, well, what makes you want to party less? Well, it made him think, like, why do I really want to? I mean, we had a really good conversation about it. Because maybe he doesn't really want to. He just thinks he does. Sometimes people say things because they think it's the right thing to say. And that is that transition from adolescence into adulthood. We say things and do things because we think our parents or whoever wants us to do that. But when there's a real transition, it's because we want to do that. We want to become that. Like we do it because we want to, for good or bad, right? Does that make sense? And that's a legit big transition for sure. I'm going to look at it. There's a couple things. All right, let's stop with that. Enough of that stuff. All right, any questions? I've been talking a lot here. Any questions about anything so far? Okay, I'm looking for one thing in particular. There it is. We're going to transition now, and we're going to talk about relationships. So before we do that, we're going to do a little group activity with everyone. Here's your group activity. Pretty simple. You're and a group. You're going to come up with top 5 things that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20. All right. So top 5 things that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20. And I realize some people are closer to 20 here than others, and that's okay. Doesn't matter. I don't care about that. What are the top 5 things that you wish you knew at 20 that you actually know now? And how would you tell yourself that? This is actually something I do with clients. All right. Pretty simple. You have 1 minute. I'm just kidding. I'll give you a couple minutes. Ready? Go. All right. One group left. Huh. Jill, I thought you had a class.
That was last week.
Last week.
Yeah, I missed last week. Had to meet with my group.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So what do y'all do? Just like show all your faces in the group, but not when you're with me. I see what's happening. I got it. I understand.
Exactly, because I'm leaving now. Bye.
I understand. So what am I supposed to think about that? I don't know. All right. Tell me, what are we telling ourselves? You know, if you get in a time machine, go back, tell yourself at 20, you can tell yourself anything.
Save money.
Save money. Okay.
Mhm. Stay in school.
Stay in school.
Yeah,
Okay.
after undergrad, keep going.
Just keep going.
Yeah, don't wait 23 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. What else?
To take advice from your parents. They
Ah!
really do know what they're talking about.
Oh, y'all know what Mark Twain said about parents?
What's that?
He said, parents get smarter the older I get.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, absolutely.
True. That's a great piece of advice.
Yeah.
What else?
I waited till 25 or so, but wait on having children. Like,
Wait on it.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't like super young when I had I think I was close to 27, 28 when my daughter was born, but still, I think that decision on waiting was probably connected to getting married so young. I didn't have a kid right away, but when I talked to my son, I was kind of proud. I asked him recently, I was like, hey man, so do you want to have kids? He's like, yeah, maybe. He said, but it'll be a while. I was like, why? He said, because they take all your money. I was like, oh, good point. He's speaking about himself.
Yeah, they do. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Anything else?
We also discussed like you're going to fail. So just learn from that failure, accept what that, failure taught you and go from there.
Yeah, I do this exercise with clients a lot. Because I think it's one way to get people to talk to themselves and because everything y'all just said, you could tell yourself now.
Yeah.
I mean, some things would be tweaked, obviously, but if I were to tell you, let's say everyone in here, we Zoomed and you were all 70, and I said, hey, what would you tell yourself when you were 30 or 40 or whatever age you are now, right? It's the same thing, the idea behind it is trying to help people start to realize that they have they have certain wisdom inside them they need to start using. Sometimes we get trapped into like negative thinking patterns that really kind of stop us from the really unhelpful thinking patterns more precisely. They just kind of trap us and bog us down. And if we can get out of that, it helps us a little bit. So I just like, and plus I like doing these in class because I think it's fun. All right, now let's talk about relationships because relationships start to become very important during this phase. So attachment, when we think about attachment, and these are just 3 basic styles. There's other sub-styles inside of each of these, but for our discussion, we're going to talk about these 3: secure, avoidant, and anxious. And so the majority of adults typically describe themselves as secure and definitely want other securely attached partners. And so the secure style is that like positive view of relationship. You know, it's easy to get close to people, not overly concerned or stressed out about the romantic relationship. The avoidant type is kind of what it sounds like, a little more hesitant to get involved. But once they are involved, they tend to start distancing themselves from their partner. The anxious type is they want closeness and they almost demand it. They're a little less trusting. Their emotions run a little higher, like jealousy and being possessive. And so it doesn't mean that you're trapped in a style. You can always change the style, but you first have to kind of know what style you're in. And there's I don't know if I put the attachment inventory on this classroom on Moodle. I can't remember, but there's attachment style assessments out there that are pretty good. You can take that'll tell you. Jenny, you're saying yes? Yeah. Okay. You can take it. It's pretty good, and it'll give you what your style is. I think I use it in my practice with couples all the time, and I think it's very, very helpful. One thing to note about especially the avoidant style, sometimes the way it looks is when you get involved, fall in love, get married even, and over time even, there starts to be this kind of push away from one of the partners, and they're pushing away not to get away, but pushing away to see if that person's going to stay, because maybe that happened to them in their life somewhere. That's one thing that happens. So having said that, one of the things that let me get over here. This is actually in your book. Hang on a second, bear with me. This is actually in your book. This little graphic here is in your book. It's been around for a while. It's kind of interesting because I think this does a pretty good job of just kind of giving basics for kind of what like the faces of love. And so what, infatuation, affectionate, fatuous, consummate love, like each one of those, what they kind of look like. And so each side of the triangle is equal. And if you have intimacy, commitment, and passion that come together, that forms consummate love. It's not uncommon for couples at any point to have 1 or 2 of those, or maybe lack 1 of those, or have all 3, kind of go up and down. But in general, consummate love is kind of what you're shooting for in the long term. But if you think about it in terms of like, okay, if we have really high passion, and passion is exactly what it sounds like, the sexual attraction, the lusting, the flirtation, but you have low intimacy and low commitment, it's infatuation. It's exactly what it sounds like. Affectionate love can be very, very, very low passion, but high commitment and high intimacy. And that's a lot of affection. And fatuous love is where you have a lot of high passion and high commitment, but very low intimacy. That particular style is one that you see folks get together, break up, get together, break up, get together, break up, because you have a lot of commitment and you're intimate, in terms of like sharing things, sharing your life, sharing your emotions, sharing your dreams and goals, sharing vulnerabilities, but there's very low passion. That's that kind of fatuous love. And then consummate love is where you kind of have all three that work together. And you also realize that you have to work on all three in your relationship in order to kind of keep those strong too. And so I think, let me pull this up here. Hang on 1 second. So this is just kind of looking at just kind of describe, and again, this is on the book. Sorry. There we go. Intimacy, where you have high intimacy, is basically that self-disclosure, sharing private thoughts, kind of connecting emotionally on an emotional level. You can have that romantic love, which is very high passion, affection. You kind of have a little more love than passion. And when you have consummate love, it's something that involves all three of those dimensions coming together. And what makes the part hard sometimes is over time, it's not uncommon for one or more of those to erode, maybe over time, because that happens. Divorce, in terms of like when people divorce doesn't most typically happen all of a sudden. Divorce most typically happens over time, where there's a disconnection or disconnect over time. It typically doesn't happen all of a sudden. Obviously it can, but the majority of times it does not. And so if you end up working with couples, you can kind of get into there's lots of studies that we can talk about how to keep these kind of all three of those sides working together. But when you work with couples, just basic things that like when people start let's say they start disconnecting in terms of like their intimacy, that one, sometimes you can just simply have them revisit how they got together, or revisit what their first connections were, revisit some of the feelings that they had when they first became involved, and have them kind of walk through those again. That helps with that intimacy. Sometimes that lack of intimacy and even lack of passion comes because there's been maybe one partner reaching out and the other partner not reciprocating that, and I'm talking about over time, not like once or twice. We're saying over time. That's one of the things that happens. And so I like this kind of graphic because it gives, and I've showed this to my clients before, just, hey, what do you think about this? I'm actually working with an individual right now she's struggling with a lot of things relationship wise. And I showed her this and she's like, oh my gosh, this is what I usually do all the time instead of this. And she was able to kind of start to put together some things for herself just by kind of looking at this. And we talked about it too. One of the great things about doing virtual therapy that I do now is I can pull things up and show people things all the time. I do it all the time. I'm like, or even show them videos or whatever. I can show them things that they can look at. And so I think it really helps. I think it really helps with people to be able to show them things and let them kind of see. There was one other thing I was going to share. Okay, let me get over here. One of the things that's happening, no, hang on a second, sorry. I got my slides out of order here a little bit. We'll talk about this real quick, because I was talking about how kind of marriage is end up even people that don't get married but live together or have been together for a long time. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time. Some groups that have a higher incidence of divorce fall in these areas, these categories, which is really interesting because I keep bringing up this idea of like 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Youthful marriage 150 years ago that's what people did. Now that's not necessarily what people do. But there's reasons why now, like low education, low income, not having a religious affiliation, parents who are divorced, having a baby before marriage. These are just one of the reasons why these are increase the incidence is because these are more stress factors that you're going to have on top of other stress factors that you have when you get married. And so these are just kind of examples of that. Typically the first 10 years of marriage are really the first 7 are really hard. The second 7 or 10 are not as hard. And depending on how those 20 go, the back 20, we'll see, because that back 20 has a lot to do with the first 20. The reason I say that is because for the most part, the highest percentage of adults that are married also have kids somewhere in that first 20 or so. And that typically does also put a severe strain on marriages as well, just like everything else, like moving and work and money and everything else that comes in that's involved. And so if, for example, if a couple has kids, multiple kids, let's say, and then they lose themselves in parenting and they don't really do much with their marriage over 20 years, that's a long time. And then the kids are gone, or 25 years, and then the kids are gone, and here they are. It makes it very difficult. And so you have to have a pretty high commitment level. There's also divorce likelihood increases if one partner has alcoholism or psychological problems, obviously domestic violence, infidelity. This inadequate division of household labor kind of takes people by surprise sometimes. That is a huge deal. There is 0 couples I've worked with in the last 15 years that don't talk about this. 0. That division of household labor is a thing. Now, why would y'all think that? I see a lot of people shaking their head right now. Why do y'all think that is?
I don't know, it's hard to explain, but you find yourself even being kind of passive aggressive over it. Like, like with my husband, I'll walk by the sink and it's like my cups are in the sink. He washed his cups, but we can't wash my, things like that. Like little teeny tiny things that build up over time because you're like, well, this is so silly to mention. But then as you hold on to it longer, I think.
Yeah. What else?
I feel like with like the advent of the increase of like the discussion of gender roles, I feel like some people might feel like, well, that's not a man's job, or that's the job of, you know what I mean? I feel like that might be a part of those things that are not being talked about. It's just happening and hovering and boiling over. And instead of talking about it, people just getting upset.
So this idea of if you grew up in a household where mom did X and dad did Y. Right. And then you get married and that's the expectation.
Exactly.
Even if it's unspoken.
Right.
That could be a problem. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely. I think so. Yeah.
I've worked with couples where that was discussed over and over and it's still a problem.
Well, it can be, but if you don't talk about it, it's definitely going to be a problem, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
But
Absolutely.
what if say for
Uh-oh.
instance,
What if?
what if that's kind of like spilled over in premarital counseling?
Uh-huh. What do you mean?
And like, what if that's like discussed in premarital counseling, like that's how it's supposed to be, like the woman cleans the house, the man takes out the trash and takes care of
Well,
the cars and things like that.
so here's what I'll just tell you guys. Let's talk about it from a research standpoint. So all the research will tell us that if spouses agree on the division of labor, no matter what that is, if the spouses agree and believe that women do X and husbands do Y, even if they're same sex couples and they agree on this person does this person does that, because that's how I was raised, and they have that belief and they both agree on it, then they usually don't have any trouble at all. Even if an outside person would go, man, that's straight out of the 40s. They would see it as this isn't a thing. This isn't a big deal. They don't have a problem with it. If they don't have a problem with it, it's not a problem. It only becomes a problem when one person has a problem, or this has happened in multiple couples I've worked with, other people get in their ear. That happens too. Right? So I think it's a really good question. And that's true for other things too, not just division of labor. The reason why I bring this one up, alcoholism, psychological problems, domestic violence, infidelity, those typically will be presenting issues a lot of times when you work with couples. Like those are things that they're going to openly talk about, like maybe not alcoholism always, but the division of labor discussion typically happens sometime, somewhere. Right? So I'll tell you guys I think I told this in another class, but this is my division of labor story. I was working with a younger couple, like late 20s. They had one baby and she was pregnant, and very interesting couple, high conflict couple, but their high conflicts revolved around household labor things. And one day they came in and they were already kind of anxious. Both of them are very anxious anyway. And as we were talking, the husband brought up the sponge they use for wiping the counter off. He didn't even say anything really about it, just kind of brought it up. And the wife got mad. She was pissed instantly and sat there for a while. And I finally was like, what's going on right now? And the husband jumped, he didn't even let her talk. He jumped in, he said, well, I don't like it when you don't wring out the sponge. And I keep telling her over and over to wring out the sponge. And then again this morning, she did it again. And I gently told her again. And she sat up and she looked at him and she said, if you bring up this fucking sponge one more time, I'm going to shove it up your ass. Straight face. I'm talking about straight. This wasn't a movie. This was like, it was about to get real, right? Now, in my head, I was laughing, if I'm being honest. But that kind of thing legit happens because of this kind of, it's a little thing, right? It might even be one of those things that when you're 40, you go back to when you're 20 and go, don't worry about a sponge being wet. That's not a big deal. You know what I'm saying? Like as you get older, but at the time, it means a lot because we assign these meanings to it, right? Well, he or she doesn't care about me because, or what, whatever, right? Which is not really probably true, but that's what we do, right? And this division of labor thing it's a big one. I don't even ask about it anymore. It just comes up. And as a side note, I actually went and told my wife about it because it was so funny and we laughed. And then we went to Costco a couple days later and she came around the corner with a great big huge package of sponges. And I mean, I fell on the ground laughing. I know that's really bad, but sometimes you just got to laugh at stuff. And I felt really bad for them. I really did. And it took the rest of the session to calm her down. She was pissed, really, really mad. She was not having it. He did not bring up the sponge ever again in the session. That never happened. Oh, we are going. Yeah, sorry, Jeannie, go ahead.
Can I tell you a quick funny story on my marriage prep with that? Super
Yeah,
short.
love it. Love it.
A little bit of imparting wisdom, but I got married really young, and I was telling my aunt when I was engaged that that my fiance Peter would like crumple up paper towels and leave them on the counter everywhere, and he'd be like, "Well, I'm going to use it again. I'm coming back."
How dare he?
And I was like, it just really bothers me. And then my aunt was visiting, and we were at my parents' house, and she like took her napkin at the dinner table and she crumpled it up and she set it like almost on top of my plate. And I was like, "Oh, do you want me to like throw this away or something for you, Aunt Mary?" And she was like, no, I'm saving it for later. And then I finally caught on that she was like making fun of us. And
Yeah.
then she whispered to me, "Jenny, what's worse, for Peter to crumple up paper towels and leave them everywhere, or for Peter to have a wife that's a bitch?"
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I thought about that, and it really
Yeah.
helped me in my marriage to not complain about some stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is obviously you learn about, so John Gottman calls it solvable problems versus unsolvable problems. Every couple has 6 to 8 unsolvable problems. They're problems that you've had, or not 6 to 8, not 3 to 7 problems that from this time you were together until you died, they're going to be things you're just going to have to navigate. They're not solvable. Like my wife and I, we struggle to be on the computer together. It's the dumbest thing. It doesn't even make sense. But when we're on the computer together, we're going to fight. 100% of the time, after 25 years, 100% every time. It's unsolvable. We've tried everything and now we just navigate it. Versus solvable problems. What are things that you can actually do something about? And that's where we come in. We help them solve things or help them find those problems that are solvable. Sometimes we do the reverse. We try to solve the unsolvable problems. And some problems might not be solvable. For example, I've worked with not very many, but a few couples that had a child, and one of them wanted to have another child and the other one did not. And that's a big deal, right? And it's unsolvable in some cases. Like that's just the idea is one of them sacrifices, or I mean, like how do you? And so we went through all the pros and cons. We did all the decision making. We did all the walking around it and everything, and it became an unsolvable problem. And that's an example. I mean, there's other ones, but that's an example. Versus solvable problems like crumpled up napkins or cups in the sink, or I mean, there's all these things that we can probably figure out, how to do, because we can complain without blame. If we complain with blame, it never goes well. But you can make a complaint without blaming. If you can learn how to do that, then it's not a problem. It doesn't mean it always goes well, but it's easier. Does that make sense? Because I'm not a fan of one or either one of the partners not saying anything ever. I'm not a fan of that. That's good. That's not going to work. Somebody's going to blow up all over the place. It's going to come out somewhere. Especially when you have kids, they will come out. That's just what will happen. So you have to figure out ways to, talk about it. Now, John Gottman does an interesting thing with this. He calls it a state of the marriage, or kind of a state of the marriage meeting, where you'll sit down and talk about your marriage. And there's when I do it with couples, we come up with like whatever they're going through, we'll come up with like, here's the 2 or 3 or 4 things you're going to talk about, but it's a set time too. It's like there's a start and an end, and it's not, we're going to start at 10, we're going to finish whenever. It's not that. It's like 30 minutes, maybe 45, maybe roughly. The rule of thumb is talking about money is about a 15-minute conversation. Talking about your marriage could be 30 or 45 minutes, and that's probably okay. And it doesn't mean every day. It means one time until you get better at it. Typically, that's what you want to do. And that's how you help people figure out how to solve solvable problems. Because most of the household things are solvable, most of them, But as you're married longer, sometimes you do let some stuff go. That's true too. That's true for sure. Absolutely. Next time we meet, we're going to dive into the parenting world more, because that's really, as we get into that late 20s on into the 30s, and we start talking about parenting. But we're going to talk about parenting at the beginning and the end. So parenting with your kids and then your parents as they get older. We're going to talk about both those. That's a big transition. That's a one class. That's like a 10-week class right there. That whole thing is probably a long class. So that's where we'll jump in next time. Is this class helpful? Hopefully, for everybody.
Yeah, I think
No
so.
one's gonna say no. I don't know why. I asked.
Yeah.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
When you say, complaining's okay, but it's the blaming. Can you give an example?
Yes. So, all right, I'm going to use Jill's cup in the sink thing. What's your husband's name?
Che.
Che?
Che. Mm-hmm.
C-H-A?
A-Y.
Che. That's a cool name.
Yeah, it is.
I like that.
Uh-huh.
You just married him because of his name.
I did.
Okay. All right. If Joe goes to Che and says, why do you never wash all the cups? I get tired of you not washing all the cups. You need to wash all the cups. That's definitely a complaint, right? But the key pronoun there is you. You. Anytime we use the word you, it's instant defensiveness. Like almost 100% of the time. Versus, and you do it multiple ways. I think this is bothering me. I know it's stupid, but I know you only wash your cup. I don't know why it bothers me. It does bother me. Would you mind washing all the cups? Would that be okay? I mean, you do it however, you can do it multiple ways, but if you go at it from the, getting in your face and the Facebook, Twitter way, you're going to have trouble, right? Versus, hey, I know this is weird. I don't know why it bothers me, but it does. In other words, this is how I feel, right? Like start with me and then transition to them, right? Because this will sound like a small thing, but it's a big deal. Whenever we're talking with people, if we start with us and then transition to them, what we're actually saying is, you're not making me feel this way. This is how I'm feeling. Anytime we intimate that you are making me feel a certain way, we're going to get a lot of defensiveness and a lot of roadblocks. Especially if that's happening all the time. Like, right? Like if that's like your constant form of communication, versus if you come in and say, hey, here's how I'm feeling, right? I'm feeling this way, or I think I'm upset about this. Like my wife and I were driving the other day. We had to drive somewhere to take a stroller. We had to drive like an hour away. And I was really irritable. And finally I was like, I think I'm irritable. And I told my wife, I was like, I know I'm irritable right now. I'm just annoyed. I'm annoyed because this, and this. I'm like, I'm not mad at you. I'm annoyed with blah, blah, blah. And I really don't understand this. It wasn't her, I'm annoyed. I'm irritated. I'm frustrated. Right. It doesn't mean we don't have influence over each other. Doesn't mean that we can't, but we don't cause things. We have influence over each other. Now, if Che was leaving certain cups in there on purpose to be a butthole, that's different. Right? Does that make sense? Like
Yeah, I don't
sometimes
think, yeah.
I
it
don't
wasn't.
think that's happening. But in our brains, if we don't address it, the other thing that can happen over time is we will look at those cups and go, that son of a gun, he's doing that on purpose. He knows, right? Then we start what? Mind reading, predicting the future. Those are two cognitive distortions that we do individually. And if we do that enough, what happens? We make it actually happening. It's actually real. And then we feel like it's real. And then all of a sudden, it's real. And just because we feel something's real doesn't mean it's actually happening. Does that make sense? That's Melissa, that's way more of a answer than you were looking for, but those are examples. Does that make sense, hopefully?
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So that example, me saying who would ever not only wash their own cups and put them in the dishwasher, that probably wouldn't be helpful either, right?
What do you
This
think?
sounds like a narcissist, basically.
What idiot wouldn't wash all the cups? What kind of house is this? Why are we in this? Like, what is wrong with everyone here? Everyone in this house is a moron except for me.
Okay, now I need to know why he wasn't watching all of them.
Okay, so like we have 2 kids, and so I feel like every time we look up, there's another damn cup. Like we go through like
Yeah.
20 cups. So
Yeah.
mine are like Yetis, and so they don't just easily go in the dishwasher, or I don't want them in the dishwasher. So it's my, you know what I mean? Like, and so he'll throw
So
his
it's
in.
your fault.
It is. But like if he's already doing dishes and already in there, I'd be like, oh, if you're already got the water all soapy and hot and everything, why not just clean those while you're over there?
Yeah.
Why not?
And sometimes we want people to do things that we would do or
Yeah.
treat people like we would treat them.
Yeah.
Everybody's like, yeah.
I'm totally giving him a hard time. Like,
No, yeah, sure. No. But this is a good example. It's one thing if something like this happens once in 20 years. If this happens 1,000 times, then all of a sudden it's like, then you're coming to see me and we're having to talk about cups in the sink and sponges that aren't, yeah. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Now that
free therapy, Doc.
yeah,
We appreciate
I'm gonna send everybody a bill. I'm gonna
Okay.
send everybody a bill. 2
Well,
hours.
we're here dying this whole time, wondering if you broke it to that couple how unsanitary it is to be using a sponge to clean the countertops.
Oh my gosh.
That's a good one.
It's like killing me.
I was
I'm
thinking the same thing.
Listen,
If you just use paper towels, it would be a solvable problem.
listen. Don't even start. Well, y'all trying to use logic. Y'all use this logic in a situation that's not logical. We're talking about emotions, right? They're just like, oh. Y'all should have seen her face though. Oh man. I mean, I was laughing in my head really hard. I know it's horrible, but it was like the way she said it. It was like, and she was so serious, and he was just like, oh my gosh, like taken aback. It was really funny. I just sat there too for a little bit and let it kind of sit, and that made it even funnier. So, yeah, y'all are trying to use logic on something that's is not logical.
Do you ever accidentally laugh during the session when you shouldn't?
Of course. I probably do
Okay.
all kinds of things I shouldn't do.
Okay.
I'm sure I say things in these classes I probably, I try to be careful, but I'm sure. I mean, you can't help but, this is the thing. Only sociopaths really mean to be mean and harmful and hurt people. The majority of human beings don't mean to hurt people. They're really not. Now they are hurtful. They can be hurtful, but I don't know if their like sole intention is to be hurtful. Now that's because I'm a humanistic person and I do believe that people are good. Not everyone believes that, and that's okay. But that's the only way I can kind of work with people the way I work with them. Because I think there's reasons why people do things. Not people don't just do things in a vacuum. There's reasons why people say things, do things, act certain ways. If there weren't reasons, then I would have a hard time doing this for sure. Because then everybody would be locked in, right? You'd just be one way and that's it. So, okay. Any other questions about anything? I'm gonna send everybody a bill for $300. All right, now you can all go do something else. I'm gonna go. I'm probably gonna go to bed because I'm tired.
I gotta go do dishes now.
You need to do all the dishes
All the dishes.
and wring out the sponge. Don't let that sponge in there.
Don't
Okay,
use the sponge.
I know. I know. Right. Let's see. We don't meet again until May 4th. So is that 2 weeks? Yeah, 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks. Oh, you know what? I didn't talk about the paper. Do y'all need any? Do you have any questions about the paper? You know you have one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean I feel like the directions are pretty good on the paper.
That's
big-
due on the 6th, correct?
Yes, that sounds right. Or is it the 6th or is it the 13th? I don't remember.
It's the 6th.
So in Moodle, it says the 13th, but on the import dates, it says the 6th.
We like the 13th better than the 6th? Or does that run
Yeah.
up against a bunch of other class
Please.
stuff? Why don't we go with the 13th and I'll send that message out to everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, you can turn it in whatever you want. I don't care.
Right.
Turn it in whatever. All right. Live long and prosper. Talk to you all in a couple weeks.
Thank you.
All
Have
right.
a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.